Good evening, everyone. I want to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to the Secretary's Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Board Special Session on Biomass. We appreciate all of you being here. Let me begin by reading the ethics statement. In accordance with the State Government Ethics Act, it is the duty of every board member to avoid both conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflict. If any board member has any known conflict of interest or is aware of facts that might create the appearance of such conflict with respect to any matters coming before the board today, please identify the conflict or the facts that might create the appearance of a conflict to ensure that any inappropriate participation in that matter may be avoided. If at any time any new matter raises a conflict during the meeting, please be sure to identify it at that time. I want to thank board members that both showed up tonight, this evening, and the ones who agreed to join us virtually. Thank you as well. For all of you who have joined us publicly tonight, let me thank you for being here this evening. This is a very important issue, and we're anxious to hear from you. So thank you for being here. If you did not sign in when you came, please do so at some point in this meeting. Otherwise, we'll have to send somebody to visit you. So please sign up, and the same thing for board members. We have a multifold agenda this evening on this very important issue. First, we're going to hear from DEQ, and then we will have opportunity to hear community perspectives on the issue, some opportunity for question and answer based on the presentations that we hear, and then we will have a period of public comment at the end of the meeting. So that's the agenda, and we promise to get you out of here just in time for breakfast tomorrow morning. So thank you all for being here. First up, let me welcome Michael Abrazaniskas, the Air Quality Division Director of DEQ, to provide an overview of the Division of Air Quality permitting process. Mr. Abrazaniskas, thanks so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here. Board members and guests this evening, thank you so much. I'm Mike Abrazaniskas. I'm the Director of the Division of Air Quality here within DEQ. I'm going to give a few brief remarks tonight, and then my staff and I will be in a listening mode and look forward to that throughout the evening this evening. With me tonight, I have our Acting Deputy Director in DEQ, Taylor Hartsfield, our Public Information Officer, Sean Taylor, and our Permitting Section Chief, Mark Suilla. So before I actually get into the slides, I just want to give you a quick 30-second air quality update, because I think it's really important news that we share that today is the 2,642nd consecutive day that we're attaining all of the health-based standards here in North Carolina for all the criteria pollutions. That's quite an accomplishment. It took a lot of great partnerships along the way. I just want to say thank you for your help and role and partnerships on part of that journey with us. It's great news for public health. It's really what it's all about. Again, 2,642 days and counting. Next, I wanted to share that in North Carolina, our latest emissions inventory from stationary sources across the state, we inventory those stationary sources periodically. And what our latest data shows is we've reduced toxic air pollution in North Carolina over the last 2 decades by 120 million pounds. 120 million pound reductions over the last 2 decades. So I think that's just a remarkable number to me when we actually look at some of the data and analyze some of the data. So just geeking out a little bit with you on some of that information. And then finally, on the greenhouse gas front, our latest inventory was updated earlier this year ahead of a number of executive actions put into place by Governor Cooper. And that latest greenhouse gas emissions inventory shows that we've reduced greenhouse gases in North Carolina by 23% relative to a 2005 baseline. And we are on a very good trajectory with, again, a lot of the executive orders, Executive Order 80, Executive Order 246, Executive Order 271, signing of the medium heavy duty ZEV MOU, which you all have heard about previously as well. We're on a very good trajectory to do a lot of good between now and the end of the decade and reaching some of those greenhouse gas reduction goals. So That was my quick update on a broad scale, but now really just get a little bit more focused on the topic this evening of air quality permitting of wood pellet facilities in North Carolina. I think that's really what you all wanted to hear this evening. So give just a brief high-level overview of the types of air pollutants that can come from these facilities. This type of manufacturing can emit particulate matter, volatile organic compounds or VOCs, toxic air pollutants, hazardous air pollutants, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, not a surprise, I think you all are familiar with this, and greenhouse gases. And in some cases or in all cases where the permits are written to ensure that the levels of these emissions don't violate any of those health-based standards that I mentioned earlier, there are controls that are required. And for some of those controls, such as thermal or combustion controls that are designed to control or reduce hazardous air pollutants, the toxic air pollutants, the ones that we are most concerned about, there are trade-offs because those pollution controls then generate, through the combustion of those gases, some other pollutants, right? So in turn, you're producing greenhouse gases in order to reduce, or NOx perhaps, to reduce the hazardous air pollutants. So I just want to recognize that and acknowledge that there are some trade-offs in the process of controlling air pollution at times for different types of situations. So who are the wood pellet manufacturers in North Carolina that have air quality permits? There are 4 Enviva pellet facilities in North Carolina. 4 facilities. There's one in Hertford, Northampton, Sampson, and Richmond counties. Each of those hold a Title V permit. There's one wood pellet facility, American Wood Fibers in Scotland County, and they hold a synthetic minor permit. And what that means is they could be a major source or a Title V source if it weren't for conditions put in the permit that limit their emissions to stay below those major source thresholds. And then there's another facility that recently had their permit rescinded. We rescinded their permit in July of this year in Robeson County named Active Energy. And again, that facility has left the state and we've rescinded their permit. So let's just a quick slide, high-level overview on the history of the permitting of the wood pellet facilities in North Carolina. And I think, you know, some of the original permits were developed under our Title V or Major Source Permitting Program back in the early part of the decade of 2010. And some of those facilities started production and operation around 2011. Once some of those facilities began operating under their initial permits, and they did some of the required stack testing that we required in those initial permits, we very soon realized that their emissions in some cases were higher than what we anticipated, what they anticipated, and what their vendors guaranteed for some of the equipment that they operated and designed and built and ultimately operated on site. Those emissions being higher caused a problem from our perspective. In some cases, they were not in the right permit. In some cases, they were in direct violation of the permit that we had issued. And so we had to pursue a number of compliance initiatives across the whole fleet of these 4 Enviva pellet facilities. There were a variety of enforcement actions and ultimately even settlement agreements to get the company to commit to a schedule, to get into the right permit, and install the proper controls to reduce air pollution at these sites. And so after all of these new controls are installed on the schedules outlined in the updated permits, each of these facilities will now be minor sources under the state's Prevention of Significant Deterioration permitting program, and also minor sources or below major source thresholds for hazardous air pollutants, or HAPs. So let's take a broader snapshot of the emission reductions that have resulted from all of those actions, because we started in a very different place, as I acknowledged earlier, with those initial permits. So you'll see in this table the cumulative or combined total of throughput or oven-dried tons per year that were going to be produced by these 4 facilities, and the potential VOC emissions, hazardous air pollutant emissions, and particulate matter emissions. Again, these were their potentials in that first column labeled startup when we did the initial permitting back in the 2010 era. After the adjustments, as I noted, that were necessary to these permits, you can see what the latest potential to emit is with the latest permits. While their production most certainly went up, they requested production increases in most cases. Their potential to emit has gone down drastically, and you can kind of see the percent changes here in the red text for those various pollutants. 68% lower for VOCs, 66% lower for the hazardous air pollutants, and 24% lower in particulate matter. Again, this represents their potential to emit. Their actual emissions may be even lower, but this represents what is the maximum allowed across the fleet in North Carolina from where we started and where we are today. Okay. Another example of our division making sure that Enviva complies with its permit. During the Enviva Northampton permit renewal process and public process, we heard a number of concerns from the public about the possibility of dust, fugitive dust, leaving this property. So starting last summer, our inspectors from our Raleigh regional office made unannounced weekly and bi-weekly trips to Northampton County to look for dust in the area and take pictures. During every one of those trips between June of 2021 and February of 2022, our staff did not see any dust leaving the facility's property. These visits were in addition to our annual unannounced inspection schedule, and we've received no complaints about the facility since January of 2015. But if we did, we would immediately launch an investigation of any concerns that we learn of from the public. I'll also note that we have a monitoring site in Northampton County, and we have not recorded any exceedances of any of the standards that we are monitoring for in that area. That monitoring site was placed there for a number of reasons, but one of them was some of our initial conversations with community members, including Belinda Joyner from Northampton County. And so we continue that monitoring site, and we also want that monitoring site to be an educational resource as it's cited at the high school there in Northampton County. And so we welcome anyone that in that area of the state that wants to visit that site and bring a classroom and let that be an educational experience. I will offer that for that particular site, or really any in the state for that matter. So recently, most recently, DAQ drafted a modified air quality permit for Enviva Ahoskie. So this was the last in the series of adjustments that were necessary to address the compliance schedule that we had talked about earlier. And so this permit, again, still in draft form, a final action has not occurred yet, would require the facility to install the same control devices that are already required at the other 3 Enviva facilities in North Carolina. When we posted the draft permit to public notice in July, we began a comprehensive enhanced public outreach process in collaboration with our environmental justice team here at DEQ to develop meaningful engagement with the community and our stakeholders. We held an in-person public hearing in Ahoskie on August 16th. And in addition, this enhanced engagement process included publishing a public notice in the local newspaper, issuing multiple press releases and engaging with local and national media, news media, and developing a one-page fact sheet that summarized the proposed project and how to provide comment. We provided that fact sheet and the environmental justice report and press release to nearby sensitive receptors, including churches, hospitals, and parks. We also reached out to local governments and the local health department, community leaders, and the Meherrin tribe to provide project information and encourage these leaders to share the information that we provided them to their networks within their own communities. We also leveraged social media for this particular effort, and also email, USPS distribution, etc. Commenters had a couple of options for leaving public comment in this enhanced public process, including the ability to provide comment via email, mail, calling a voicemail box that we had set up, or attending the public hearing that we held on August 16th. Okay, so as a result of that public process, we made some changes to the draft permit. And so some of those specific examples include the ones you see here on the slide. And that is a requirement to update the fugitive dust plan to develop strategies to control fugitive dust emissions from all the new sources at the facility. We are adding hydrogen chloride stack testing requirements for hazardous air pollutant emissions. We added conditions to limit hazardous air pollutant emissions and require testing during the construction phase of the project. We added language to ensure the facility is responsible for collecting sufficient data to justify new parametric monitoring values. We removed a pellet cooler cyclone construction schedule, and we had some other minor adjustments and corrections. So these changes were made to the draft permit prior to the start of EPA's 45-day review period. And I'll emphasize, no final action has been taken at this time. But after updating the draft permit based on the recommendations from both the hearing officer's report and all the comments received during the comment period, and after EPA's 45-day review, which just concluded with a response of no further comments or concerns with the draft permit, we have the schedule shown as here for the entire process that we've gone through. So that puts our statutory deadline on a final action for this particular action to be no later than November 28th of this year. Again, we just received the EPA no comments or concerns letter just last week. Okay, so that's the end of my remarks this evening. Again, I really appreciate Mr. Chairman and board members the opportunity to be here and share some information with you. My staff and I will be here in listening mode all evening tonight and really look forward to learning and hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Are there questions from the board at this point?
I have a question, and thank you very much for that report. The slide that said that you had additions as a result of the public process. So those additions that you have there, they came from the public for you to address?
Yes, ma'am. They were an outgrowth of the public comment period. Yes, ma'am.
And the reason why I ask is because I was at the hearing and I didn't hear any of these issues come up from the public, so.
Sure. Well, and that's a good point, that the public hearing is just one opportunity.
I understand that, yeah.
So we could have received emails with some of these comments.
I see.
Long, form letters or submittals via mail, voicemails on our voicemail box. So there were a variety of ways that we took comments through this process. But the hearing was one of those, certainly. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Chair. So can you elaborate on the process of actually monitoring whether in Viva is staying within the limitations of the permit? Like, what does that process look like more in detail?
That's a great question, and oftentimes folks may think that our engagement with such a facility ends at the point that we issue a permit, and it's really the beginning of our engagement with the facility. First, we do unannounced inspections of these types of facilities every year. That's more frequently than what US EPA requires for these facilities, but we feel like that more frequent unannounced inspection cycle is critical, and we are committed to that for these facilities. Additionally, throughout the permit, there are record-keeping, monitoring, and reporting requirements. And so that may, and I can't tell you the specifics for each condition, but in general, it may require these facilities to submit an annual report or a quarterly report or a biannual report with data and information that our staff are reviewing to make sure that that data is in line with the monitors and the monitoring parameters and metrics in the permit. There's also stack testing requirements where the company must hire a third-party consultant to literally kind of probe in the stack type of test. Our staff, not only review the protocols that the companies submit or their stack testing firm submits prior to the stack testing for review and approval, but we are there on the day of the testing itself to observe the stack tests to make sure the protocol is being followed. And to make sure, kind of looking over the shoulder of everyone to make sure everything is going as it should be. So those are some high-level things, but then, as I mentioned earlier as well, we have other regulatory tools in the toolbox to address things like fugitive dust, and that's a complaint-driven program. And so if we get complaints from any facility or from any particular area, we investigate those complaints. And so that's another important piece to the puzzle for these types of facilities.
One more quick question. Did you have any complaints about noise?
Did we have any complaints about noise? I don't know. I think specifically for the Hosky facility?
Yes.
Y'all, I'm looking at my staff, if y'all know if we got complaints or comments about that one?
I am sure we received comments during the public hearing phase.
And it's not uncommon that we get some comments about noise. We do our best to, since we don't have rules in our division that we can put into our permit on this, we do our best to see what types of ordinances exist, if there are any in the particular area where a facility exists, and include that in our response. But yeah, yes, ma'am, I think we do get those comments, and we do our best to address and respond to them, but knowing that we don't have the authority to put anything in the air quality permit for that type of issue.
Mr. Marshmallows.
Can you briefly describe, like, how does Title VI factor into the issuing of permits?
Yes, I think it may be maybe a better question posed to our Environmental Justice and Title VI Coordinator, Renee Kramer, just to talk about our program in general that applies to all of our permitting programs and all of our programs in DEQ.
Yeah, so I think to start, I will say that we are closely following what the EPA is recommending and how they're kind of changing their Title VI requirements and shifting from more of a reactive Title VI program to more of a proactive Title VI program. So we're definitely following that and trying to make sure that we're updating anything on our end and really making sure that we're conducting meaningful involvement as is required, specifically the language access pieces, and any other items really. A lot of what Director Uppersinski went over this evening, it is not the same thing as permitting requirements. They are slightly separate, but definitely don't have enough time to get into all of that, I think.
No, I was just thinking because of the information that's gathered from the EJ report, it states a lot of the condition of the county, health outcomes and things like that, but it doesn't really, we don't really address how that factors into the decision-making of the permit. And so just as we hear from different people about the impacts of this industry, I think that's something we should be thinking about. And one other question specifically about engagement of the Meherrin tribe, because I was at the Ahoskie hearing as well, and there was a person there from the Meherrin tribe that said that they were not really engaged. And so are you saying that after that hearing, DEQ went back and engaged the tribe and provided information about this permit in August?
I'm going to turn to our communications folks and see if it was before or after. I know that we did engage, and maybe, or
I can
Renee.
answer. Yeah, it was both. So we had reached out to the tribal leadership prior, and then after we did hear that comment at the hearing, we went ahead and followed up to see if they had any other questions after we heard that.
Thank you.
One last question.
Thank you. So what was the mechanism in the process that was triggered that led to the rescission of the permit in Robinson County? So what led to that?
Yes, you're referring to the active energy facility. The facility ultimately requested it be rescinded.
Okay.
And I believe they've, as far as I understand, they've left the state.
Okay, so they just left. Okay.
That's about all I know, actually, about that facility.
Thank you.
And we did our follow-up to make sure that there's no ability to operate at that facility.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm not cutting off discussion. We have a period called discussion on the agenda.
You're fine.
I want to be respectful of our other presenters. Thank you so much, and we
You all.
appreciate you all being here. Our next speaker is Dr. Ruby Bell, Sampson County resident and member of Impacted Communities Against Wood Pellet Coalition. Dr. Bell, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us. We're certainly happy to be here, and we certainly do appreciate this opportunity. The impacted communities, let's see if I can get started with this. Okay, thank you. The Impacted Communities Against Wood Pellet is a coalition of residents who are impacted by the pollution, the dust, the noise, and forest destruction of the biomass wood pellet industry and the Forest Protection and Environmental Justice Organization, the Dogwood Alliance. The coalition members have been studying the impacts of the wood pellet industry since the first plant opened in Ahoskie, North Carolina in 2011. North Carolina exports more wood pellets than any other state in the nation. Enviva operates 4 wood pellet plants in North Carolina that produces 2.5 million tons of wood pellets per year. NCDEQ's Clean Energy Plan of 2019 states, currently, the wood pellet industry does not contribute to North Carolina's clean generation portfolio and does not advance North Carolina's clean energy economy. Yet, NCDEQ has continued to approve permits to expand wood pellet production in North Carolina. Enviva has received nearly $10 million in subsidies in North Carolina. Currently, Enviva has a permit application under consideration for the Ahoskie, North Carolina plant. The permit will require Enviva to install air pollution controls, but would also allow them to greatly expand production, resulting in more dust pollution, truck traffic, forest destruction, and the increase of some harmful toxins. For years, Enviva claimed it was too expensive to install pollution controls. A 2019 lawsuit resulted in Enviva's agreeing to install controls. However, in the many years of operating without controls, Enviva's operations polluted local communities, and Enviva was unable to pocket $130 million by failing to install these controls. Enviva should install these air controls at Ahoskie, but their request for expansion warrants further consideration. The Impacted Communities Against Wood Pellet Coalition recommends the following actions for the EJEAB to consider. Recommendation 1, deny Enviva's application to expand production at the Ahoskie, North Carolina facility. Why? Lack of consultation with the Meherrin tribe. B, Enviva's high emissions of hazardous air pollutants We should classify them as a major source of emissions, not minor. Enviva should reduce production limits to stay under the major source threshold. Enviva's increased production will emit harmful levels of the toxin air pollutant acrolein. With this expansion, Enviva would become the highest emitter of acrolein in the state. Acrolein is linked to respiratory disease, cancer, and can cause dizziness and lightheadedness. DEQ has an obligation under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to consider disproportionate impacts. Recommendation 2, require Enviva to strengthen their fugitive dust plan in Ahoskie and install fugitive dust control plans at their other 3 facilities. These plans should include A, ensure that areas with dust are fully enclosed. B, cover wood piles at the facility and on transportation vehicles. C, increase the use of water sprays to control the dust. And D, ensure that trucks entering and exiting the facility are fully covered. Why? Fugitive dust emissions are particulate matter released from wood pellet production that does not pass through a filter and that goes into the surrounding community. NCDEQ has acknowledged that Enviva's facility has the potential to emit a substantiated amount of fugitive dust emissions. Yet, Enviva has not installed fugitive dust control plans for 3 of the 4 facilities. The plan at the Ahoskie plant is not sufficient to address all of the dust emissions. Recommendation number 3, install an air quality monitoring system that is operated by NCDEQ within a quarter mile of all of Enviva's North Carolina facilities. Why? Current air quality monitors are not close enough to the facilities to be effective. NCDEQ air quality monitors placed within a quarter mile of Enviva's production facilities would provide more accurate data on hazardous air pollutants and dust pollution. Recommendation 4, require Enviva to implement continuous emissions monitoring for volatile organic compounds. This should include frequent monitoring, reporting of NCDEQ. Any exceedances of the monthly limit should be reported to NCDEQ within 10 days. Public notice requirement for emission violations means public notices should be posted by NCDEQ and by Enviva. Enviva's current permits require Enviva to test about once every other year. The test lasts approximately 3 hours. This type of testing does not capture fluctuations in emissions and could be failing to record high peaks of emissions. NCDEQ should better protect public health by understanding what is being emitted throughout the entire year and taking appropriate actions to limit the high peaks in emissions that are harmful to the health of the surrounding residents. Recommendation 5, require Enviva to limit nighttime operations while nearby residents are sleeping from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. and or coordinate with local town officials to investigate potential violations of the town's noise ordinances. Why? Enviva's pellet production facilities operate 24/7, and many residents have shared concerns about the noise impacting their ability to sleep. While noise ordinances do not fall within the jurisdiction of NCDEQ, there are steps that NCDEQ could take to better ensure a healthy environment for the North Carolina residents. Recommendation 6, DEQ should recognize their obligation under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to consider disproportionate impacts and deny permits such as this one that adversely impact communities of color. Why? All 4 Enviva facilities are in environmental justice communities. This production expansion should adversely impact Black communities surrounding Enviva Ahoskie facility. DEQ should retain the requirement to install new air pollution controls regardless. Recommendation 7, require Enviva to consult with the Meherrin tribe during the application review process. Why? Both the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality and Enviva have a responsibility and duty to consult with the Meherrin tribe in reference to Enviva's permit application related to their Ahoskie facility. The North Carolina Commission on Indian Affairs, the Lumbee and the Haliwa-Saponi tribes, National Environmental Justice Council, the U.S. Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, the National Congress of American Indians, and the United Nations have all affirmed the need for local, state, and federal governments to engage in meaningful consultation in order to consider and mitigate the impacts of the development projects on and in tribal communities. Recommendation 8, NCDEQ should acknowledge and measure the greenhouse gas emissions of industrial logging in North Carolina by updating the carbon accounting methodology of the land use and forestry sector in the state's greenhouse gas emission inventory, cataloging the emissions of the forestry industry separate from any net growth benefits, perform more detailed accounting of forest health and age within Enviva's sourcing radius. Recommend that NCDEQ evaluate North Carolina-based CO2 emissions from the wood pellet industry for compliance with Executive Order 80. This includes CO2 emissions from the pellet manufacturing facilities themselves, as well as logging and transportation emissions associated with those facilities. Why? The production and burning of wood pellets produce high levels of greenhouse gas emissions that are currently not being accounted for. We want to thank you for your time. I have with me tonight members of the Impacted Community Against Wood Pellets Coalition, and we and they are available here to answer questions. More detailed information on these asks will be provided by various experts during the public comment period. And of course, a packet of more detailed information has already been provided by the board. So if you have some questions, I'll invite my colleagues to come up in order to help us address those.
Dr. Bell, thank you very much. Are there questions from the board? I don't know if we have,
They can unmute if they have questions.
and if any of our fellow board members online have questions, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. They don't know how to unmute or they don't have, Carlos has questions.
Right.
Velasquez.
First of all, listening to it, I could see that the courtesies that have been paid to the Meherrin and the surrounding areas is and very good and should be continued. And all your recommendations are well over the limit of help in those particular areas. But noticing that even areas that have one, like Sampson County, has has two different nations there, the Waccamaw and of course the Coherent, to be notified. And if they notify them just as they have the Meherrin, at least the people know that they are doing something to let them know what is being done, and also to protect them if something should happen like has happened to the Meherrin. I was wondering, is this something that is in the planning stages to do for other nations? And again, in some of these areas, the Black community is very hard to communicate with. Where do you go to notify someone? And the same thing with the Hispanic communities. Is this something that's in your planning for communicating to them and showing them the same courtesy as you do the Meherrin?
Is that for us or for y'all? 'Cause we're doing all, because you want to answer that? We're doing all that we can, as community organizers, we're working to be able to inform and communicate with the community. Of course, my community has a group of Blacks because that's where I live. I have not at this time gone into the tribes because they're not necessarily in our area, but I think it is a good idea to share this information with them. The area that is surrounded by the Enviva Sampson County facility is majority minority, as most of those are, with a few Caucasians around in some areas.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
Other questions? Okay. Thank you again.
I'm just wondering if those folks right there could answer that question.
The
The
DEQ?
staff, yes, the DEQ staff, yes. About the not acknowledgement and consultation with other tribes as well as the Black and minority communities members.
The other tribes.
Renee, if you want to take that one?
Yeah, so we want to be very respectful of the Commission of Indian Affairs and the locations that they have indicated are where each tribe resides. And so we are following that very closely. If there are other tribal entities or tribes that we should be consulting with and reaching out to, that's some feedback that we're happy to receive and try and do better for the next time that we're in that area.
But it is part of our regular practice to reach out to any tribes and areas where we have permitting actions.
Not to be rude, but there is some, I know there's a public comment section, but there is someone here from the mayor, maybe, I got you, I just want to.
Thanks so much. Terrific. We'll get to that, absolutely. Thank you. Yes.
Can I just ask, and this is for DEQ, the question about the other, concern that was brought up around, is it Esserlin? Is that something that you've looked at? Or is it included, something that you're taking into consideration in the permitting process?
Yes, it is. It's a air pollutant that we review. I think it's through the lens of our state air toxics program. Is it listed as a TAP?
It's HAP and TAP.
Yes. HAP and TAP. So
Okay.
yes, ma'am, it is something that is reviewed through those rules for this particular facility.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Next, we're going to welcome one of our own, LaMisha Whittington, a member of our advisory board, and also the North Carolina Black Alliance Deputy Director of Programs. Whittington is going to continue this discussion from the community perspective. Thank you so much for being here and your willingness to present this evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you so much, Chair Johnson. So good evening. Very excited to be able to actually continue this conversation with a community perspective lens. I do want to say that I acknowledge I've sat down with both community leaders, the coalition that's here present, and have also sat down with leaders at DEQ and understand that there's stop gaps kind of between that we're trying to both come in the middle where there's laws and policies that still don't exist on the books that ties sometimes our hands as legal advocates, but understand that the community and the impact, we don't have an option to not have our issues, our health impacts resolved and to be considered and how we can navigate in the gray area of the permitting process, how we can begin to look at air pollution. And I will have an overlay of noise pollution because we know that there is PM, particulate matter, that is sometimes considered in noise pollution. And have we navigated in those spaces of pollution enough with the policies that do exist. And so that's my position today. It's a community perspective, but I want to ground for both listeners that thank you so much for listening into the meeting, but also folks here in space, that when we talk about biomass, we're hearing this is a lot about renewable energy. Our state and the conversion to clean energy, but I want to ground that in research, we'll get to that, wood pellets are not considered renewable. It is extractive of resources, and it is hard to renew in the wake of deforestation. So as we begin to look at wood pellets, we have to challenge the notion that it is a renewable energy that is renewing our ecosystems, that is plenishing our biodiversity, when in actuality it's increasing core temperatures, removing protection from irrigation, from flood mitigation strategies that our departments have worked so hard to put in place. Well, that's destroyed when we look at deforestation. So I ground that with this, brief definition of biomass is considered, of course, an organic matter used as fuel to produce heat or electricity. I really want to ground that, organic matter. And that's what we're looking at today. Wood and wood residues, energy crops, agricultural residues, waste from industry, farms, and households. But the focus, of course, today is on wood. Right, wood pellet industry. And since biomass can be used as a fuel directly, some people use the word biomass and biofuel interchangeably. Now, again, the focus for today is on wood pellets. Wood pellets are small cylindrical pieces, 10 to 20 millimeters long, with diameters varying from 5 to 10 millimeters, produced from fine brown wood bark. They are usually used as fuel, as I already said what biomass is for, but it's done by feeding it into a burner automatically because of their small and fixed form. On the other hand, energy is consumed in the process of drying and grinding wood barks for making wood pellets. So even when we talk about the actual production and manufacturing, we have to take in consideration the thermal heat, as the director mentioned, and actually the expansion of temperature degrees in the communities that are surrounding the proximity of these plants. When we talk about urban heat islands, sometimes that impacts rural areas as well. Okay. So presentation overview, pollution priorities, air pollution, noise pollution, truck pollution, because I want us to begin to think as advocates, as the advisory board, how are we working with DEQ to talk about this advanced clean truck rule? Okay. How are we working in tandem as the advisory board to make sure that we're doing our due diligence, as we're doing tonight, but to work in hand with DEQ and DAQ to talk about those fumes and the emissions from those trucks, in addition to the air pollution that is emitted from the uncovered sawdust that community leaders have reported. And I've been in conversation with them as they have denoted those contaminants being spurred into the air. We'll talk about cumulative impact, because when we're talking about environmental justice communities, we cannot neglect cumulative impact in an intersectional analysis, because what are we really doing to make sure that we are addressing what I call a very toxic cocktail? When you have multiple Title V permitted industries in one area, when you have multiple contaminated industries, what is that cocktail when you have multiple different contaminants that are being spewed into air pollution? What happens when they are mixed? And are we holding that in accountability, and how we can work around the confines, and how you all are working around the confines legally of having to give these permits? Well, how do you check on that industry once you are permitted and in the monitoring process? So I want to start with really grounding the local landscape. We have to understand that Tier 1 counties have been the targeted communities by which these corporations have decided to permit, both for the landscape, the forestry, and the natural resources that many stewards have been community leaders in maintaining the protection of that biodiversity, but also because it's economically distressed, meaning that that community and its local leaders is going to choose a corporation because it's the promise of jobs, even though unfortunately it comes with health disparities that our community members don't deserve. So our economically distressed communities, this is of course, North Carolina specific State Department of Commerce annually ranks the state's 100 counties based on economic well-being and assigns a tier designation. So the 40 most distressed counties are designated as Tier 1. It continues to go Tier 2 and then Tier 3 for the least distressed. The factors are around average unemployment rate, median household income, percentage growth of population, adjusted property tax base per capita. This will be important as we go along, because then we have to challenge the notion, is property tax base being increased, and is there actual exponential value that's being added to the community, and is that research being conducted efficiently? We will begin to ask the question around economic growth. Is it growth if the community members are instead paying more to subsidize and have to approach health disparities and impact of the hospital, right? What is economic prosperity, and how are we moving Tier 1 counties out of that Tier 1 designation, right? So as we move, this is just a visual of the State Department of Commerce, as I mentioned before, to really show very clear and succinctly that the 4 communities that were discussing today. I understand that there's an additional operation that's in Scotland County, but we're focusing on Title V, right? Those 100-ton of air pollutant emissions that are happening collectively, not each industry, but we're looking at Title V permit industries. So when we see in Sampson County, we see in Northampton, Halifax, and Richmond, they are all Tier 1 distress counties, all right? Okay, so we've seen the economic distress. How about the health impacts and the health factors? So these are two different ranking systems, again, done by the department to help us understand what influences how long and how well we live for, right? And so that provides the measure of overall current health and the health outcomes of each county. And so factors that represent this ranking, they are predictors of how healthy our communities are, okay, and how they will be in the future. Now, what got my attention, and as we discuss this moving on, in the health factor, you'll see in the far right is a physical environment that conducts air and water quality and housing and transit, but it's 10% of the study. It's a pretty low weight in comparison to the other factors, but we have to understand when assessing environmental justice communities, cumulative impact means that if your environment is contaminated, it leads to diseases and cancers that you wouldn't aforementioned have, which goes into the bucket of how do I afford to pay for the medicine that I need in the wake of a Medicare or Medicaid gap, in the wake of lack of health insurance, in the wake of corporations not providing actual health insurance. How am I going to provide that? I have to use my salary or my hourly wage to then pay for that hospitalization, to pay for that medication. Then I have to then decide between utilities and the lights being on or staying at home. It is literally a domino effect. So we can't just silo one bucket and say, okay, well, the air quality is subpar, it's okay. Is it okay if it's dominoing impact into the other areas and the other factors, which contributes to a total ranking for health adverse outcomes? Cumulative impact. So as we talk about the 2022 health factors, the deeper shade of blue is, of course, the most health distressed. And we can see what? Richmond County. We can see, again, Northampton. We can see Richmond, and we can see Halifax are all in the deepest shades of blue, okay? When we look at health outcomes, we see, again, health outcomes is about, again, what are the factors that the state can change or the local government can improve, and that includes air quality, okay? And that will increase the likelihood of more success in the health factors if health outcomes can be changed. And we see that vice versa, they are interchangeable, but we see the same impact. The deeper shades of green means the most health outcome distressed counties. The 4 counties are in these areas, okay? And one is in the next to lighter shade of green, but they're all on the end of the scale, tipping to the most contaminated areas and the most health outcome burdened areas. So as I've mentioned air pollution over and over again, let's ground what air pollution is. Okay? It's a contamination of air due to the presence of substances in the atmosphere that are harmful to the health of humans and other living beings. So we have to include biodiversity, we have to include our wildlife, and what exactly is the cycle of life that is being impacted, impeded, or damaged due to air pollution that is in the climate or due to industrial materials, okay? So when we talk about air pollution, and this is included in the packet, and so I'll be top lining just overview instead of deeply reading, I'll be providing more of a summarization. Here's what's important. Air pollution, although levels of particle pollution and ground level ozone, it's a very important word here, pollution are substantially lower than in the past, levels are unhealthy in numerous areas of the country. An extensive body of scientific evidence shows that long and short-term exposure to fine particulate pollution, also known as fine particulate matter, okay, can cause premature death, harmful effects on the cardiovascular system, including increased hospital admissions, very important here, and emergency department visits for heart attacks and strokes, and it also links to respiratory effects, including asthma attacks. Ozone can increase the frequency of asthma attacks. I'll say that again. You'll see again ozone levels. You'll see again increase of emergency room visits. And when we look at both pollutants, and what is being drawn out here is, of course, this gaseous emissions is happening again and again and again, and air pollution creates health impacts that, again, we see as a result in the ranking system very clearly. Now, why am I breaking down air pollution? Well, because we have to know what air pollution is, the damage it can cause to understand the air pollutants is coming from wood pellets. All right? So when we look at what are the wood pellet manufacturers, we've already discussed, we are focusing on the Title V permanent industries, and that is Enviva Pellets today. The air pollutants from wood pellet manufacturing include carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxide, greenhouse gas emissions. There's more on the next slide. But when we talk about each of these, well, guess what we want to be able to note in this moment is that respiratory infections and asthma come from nitrogen oxides, air pollution. When we note greenhouse gas emissions and when we talk about carbon and pollution and harm on not our ecosystem in addition, but also to our actual respiratory systems, we're seeing sulfur dioxide that increased risk of hospital admissions or emergency room visits. Remember, I told you that was key because this is responsible, as scientific research has proven, that it increases that risk of heightened visitation to emergency rooms for folks with asthma or creating that asthma. We see the same thing with carbon monoxide when it actually contaminates and impacts your red blood cells. We see the same language in particulate matter. We see the same language in hazardous air pollutants, toxic air pollutants, same interchangeable language. We see the same with volatile organic compounds, VOCs. So it's important to note that when we are calling out these pollutants, we have to understand the grave impact that it's having that lends to these distressed communities being ranked as such. And we understand more, hopefully, the local impact that folks are holding and having to navigate out of in an already economically distressed way, and also a health distressed way. We see over and over again that particulate matter, it's very important to note, you can't see some of this matter with the naked eye, all right? So as we talk about particulate matter, as we talk about dust, sawdust inhalation, which leads me to the next section, we are not only as community members in that space, they're not only breathing in sawdust, they're also breathing in invisible matter that does what to the lungs? It creates wounds, it actually creates tears within the lung, and over time we see heightened respiratory illnesses, heightened, again, asthma rates, as you'll see here in a moment, based on these charts. Now, internationally, it was already stated in 1995 that hardwood dust was designated as carcinogenic. Softwood dust was also classified 7 years later. Why is this important? Because we understand that oftentimes wood pellet industries will denote that they have softwood only, but we've actually been in conversation with these corporations where there has been some soft admission, nothing written, where it's a mixture of hardwood and softwood. So when we're talking about making sure that we are following up with these industries, requiring them to report, how can we also ensure to place pressure where it's needed for them to conduct an analysis and actually prove that they're only using soft wood? And what is the impact of burning both hard and soft wood? Those are the questions that we really need to ask, because oak and beech wood is actually considered some of the most carcinogenic woods that there is, and also the most cancerous causing. And the last thing I'll say about this is when you have clearing of areas in the Meherrin tribe, and I appreciate Ashley for being here, this conversation, I've seen this across the nation. I've traveled to Alabama, I've traveled to Mississippi, done the same consultation with communities where their oaks are completely stripped off their land, and what's replaced is pine. Pine is a softwood, it's a crop. Okay, it grows a lot more rapidly in years retrospect than oak. But what's happening is that removal of these hardwoods is depreciating that property tax value. It's also removing actual protection for the land and creating issues, whether it's a floodplain issue. There's so many, again, layers of what you're actually talking about here. And it's also removing cover for your biodiversity, wildlife, and again, livestock to be able to sustainably yield food. We can continue to add it on. So I want to ground that hardwood, softwood, how are we reporting and getting this information? I've included long-term damage so folks can continue to look over what does the long-term damage look like. I've already elaborated briefly on this, but again, you want to look at not just the visible matter, the visible sawdust and dust and the logging. You also want to look at what are the actual invisible particles and can it be quantified to see how much they are emitting and by how many miles is it being emitted to communities. And we know that invisible dust, when I say call it invisible dust, but it's invisible particulate matter. When sawdust, larger pieces that are visible to the eye, drop to the ground, invisible pieces can last in the air for up to 4 hours. So how are we monitoring, when we're talking about air monitoring, how are we following the actual cycle of the product itself, not the corporation itself, right? So because it's a living, breathing, hardwood, softwood, respect the land, it will tell you exactly how it functions. So if it's lingering, how are we monitoring that air pollution in that lingering state? So we also have to take in consideration worker impacts. We talk about community members. We talk about those community members also work at these production facilities. Okay, so even as we're talking about alleviating worker-related illnesses, even talking about noise pollution, air pollution, there's OSHA standards. Well, that OSHA standard doesn't follow them when they go home, right? And so how are we making sure that these workers and community members alike, sometimes same people, are protected with some of the same methods of the process of analysis of what are these corporations emitting? And so the cancer of upper respiratory tract develops after exposure. I've already said this, I don't need to repeat it, but this is just research that talks about the dust of oak and beech seems to be the most carcinogenic, and we can look at the actual health impacts. So as I begin to wind down, and I want to get to my recommendations and open up to Q&A to respect the agenda, Chair Johnson, I want to include that the increased asthma, so we, following the asthma-related emergency department rates, made sure to pull research that aligned with the introduction of the actual corporations to our communities and to see, okay, was there an increase? And yes, we know there were other Title V corporations, and Viva is not the only. In certain communities, we know sometimes it's 6th or 7th in line and plus. But there was a very curious, and I understand, correlation doesn't mean causation, but it is means for exploration. Right. And so as we were looking at the age-adjusted asthma-related emergency department rates, there was this trend that as the years progressed, this is based on 10,000 persons on average, we saw an increase in the east of asthma-related emergency department visits and a decrease in the west. Same counties that are economically distressed, same counties that have the distress in health outcomes and health factors, and the same communities that are home to Enviva plants, not by virtue of their choice. Unless it's job related and economic relief. So we see this increase. You'll be able to look at this chart a little bit more closely in the file so you can actually see the numbers broken down. So it's not just the visual representation, which is just as good. You'll see the increase from 2010 to 2014 following that pathway of the corporation. In its introduction, we know that one site in 2011, another site in 2013, it continues. We see the increase again of asthma-related emergency department visits. And we know that for many communities that don't have health insurance, the emergency room is our primary physician. Okay, so this is what is reflective of that. And I want to note the actual increase in Eastern North Carolina. Very briefly, I've given a snapshot of the state, where the county is, where the state is. But we really need to focus in on the actual issues that we see in the communities that we're talking about today. Hertford County, when we talk about those pollutants again, Hertford County, the major pollutants in Hertford County include nitrogen oxide, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide. Now, we've already discussed that the correlation to being exposed to these pollutants over time increase respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular disease, and asthma rates. Okay? We're seeing morbidity and mortality rates. Asthma-related emergency department visit rates for first and second diagnosis are higher than the state of North Carolina during that same study time that I chose the increased asthma visitations to the emergency room, 2013. Increase in hospitalizations and death for heart disease and increased hospitalizations for COPD. Again, conditions related to being directly exposed to major pollutants. We see the same thing when we talk about environmental justice communities. 66% of Hertford County residents identify as racial or ethnic minorities. We see the same story over and over again based on what the actual exposure is to the pollutants. We see the same morbidity and exacerbated air quality that's leading to higher asthma rates. We're seeing really the same narrative. That's the point. Sampson County, and these are communities that are in the absence of air monitoring. So when we talk about what are the air monitors that we need to make sure that are accessible to community for data and being in relationship to what is legally permissible, right? Aggregate data, understand. But also what is in proximity to the actual corporation so that it is not picking up air pollutants or other data that is influenced by farming. Because we understand rural communities, we can have dust from different industries. So how do we make sure to take in those factors of where we're placing air monitor stations to ensure it's actually capturing the very data that we need from the very industry that we are considering permitting for, right? And so the last thing I'll say is in conversation with communities in Northampton County, you'll begin to see two things that I want to draw out, so I won't repeat what you've seen that seems like the story. I want to draw the amount of investment that community members have to invest in their own health because of these health disparities. And so in Northampton County, we see that median family income is $31,000, but $16,000 plus is spent annually on asthma-related issues. So how are we building economic relief for tier 1 counties? Because the reality is tier 1 designation, okay, that's assessed really every few years and follows the census. So 10 years ago, when these corporations were introduced and permitted, they should have increased the economic prosperity of the community by virtue of being there for over the last 10 years census. Okay, but we can simply follow that that actually hasn't been the case, and instead we see a deeper deficit of community members having to take the actual wages that they've earned to invest in their own health treatment due to, of course, well, I just like to call it very obvious facts, right? And so the last thing, and I'll skip to the recommendations and then end, Northampton County air monitoring. This was in conversation with community members and sitting with them, and just appreciate your honor for allowing me to sit with you and listen as an advisory board member and as a human and as a North Carolinian. So some of the concerns with the Northampton County air monitoring I want to elevate for the sake of just how can we follow up and be in relationships to make sure that we're doing our due diligence, director, just provide what we're hearing in community in alignment with your department, and how we're doing this at advisory board members. So air monitor site, they're sat down with a former school board member, and they informed me that in order to mitigate land overhead costs to place the air monitor on it, the high school was chosen because of wanting to keep down the overhead cost. But the location of the high school isn't actually a prime location. And so when we look at that, there are no permitted facilities within 7 kilometers of the location. Accessible by unpaved road, and maybe it's just as simple as let's sit down and see how expansive is the air monitoring process to see does it fit within that 7 kilometers. But it's something to note and to be questioned and sit down and deliberate. And the other thing is it's accessible by unpaved road. So again, dust and other debris that is virtue of a very low traffic area. Is it really capturing the traffic emissions, but is it also more specifically capturing the emissions that we need in data from Enviva? Surrounded by farming land and dust emitted by tractors. I already said that before, but this is specific to this air monitoring station. It's 8 kilometers from Northeast Halifax Northampton Regional Airport. So based on the wind rate that is provided in the actual monitoring report, what was very noteworthy to me, and it may just be something as simple as an explanation that will help me more ground my information, but the predominant increase of wind comes from the southwest and south, but the Enviva plant is east of the air monitoring location. So how are we making sure that downwind, how expansive, what is the proximity of the air monitoring station, and is it capturing what it needs to capture based on the actual natural wind and what's happening at the airport? And so these are real questions that have come with sitting with community members, and the air monitor station is located 4.6 miles away from Enviva pellets. There are other conditions, other things that I've mentioned in the report, and so the community members, I hope it reflects accurately, and please correct me where I'm not reporting accurately what I received, just to make sure that we are getting questions. I did want to end on 2 things. One, these were images submitted by community members that show the impact of their HVAC systems and their vent system and debris from their pools. So whether it's outside or whether it's inside, the contamination, they took pictures of just the debris and the dust and just how frequently they have to change their air filters and what that looks like on an ongoing basis. And this is areas within Hertford County and Little Washington, North Carolina. And so Hertford County, Ahoskie specifically. And a quote, a newborn within 4 to 5 weeks old had complications with breathing. At a 1.5 years old, the child needed a pump or machine. In community, within 1/4 of a mile, people have asthma pumps and machines. This is a small area close to the plants. So when we're talking about those increased asthma-related emergency department visits, this pairs, again, quantitative, qualitative data with the lived shared experience and stories that community members are investing in, saying, well, this is what that data looks like on the ground. I'll save this. Please look in this for the interest of time. This is very key because low-income people who come to the United States are exposed to 28% more nitrogen dioxide. We've already ground the health impacts of that. There's another quote from a community member that has witnessed and counted, according to their account in Richmond County, that they witnessed up to sometimes 200 trucks a day, okay, with sawdust and chips and logs, and they don't have covers. So then it's blowing the debris, right, blowing the wind. And then we're also seeing that certain trucks break down, the diesel, again, you're adding cumulative impact. What is transporting the contamination? What is transporting the industry materials? And what is actually the materials itself? And then please look through this. This goes into the actual traffic emissions analysis and a report that elevates the ozone levels. Told you ozone was very important. This then talks about the increase of the percentage in basis in comparison to other North Carolina counties and how it's higher in these certain areas. Again, same areas as the industry we're discussing today. Please look over this. Noise pollution, we understand that's not in the air pollution bucket, but just for your information and just for context sake for intersectional analysis, please add that into just your discussion and just wheelhouse of knowledge. That's just the request here. Because it also leads to cardiovascular issues, hearing loss, and other issues of high blood pressure and cognitive impairments, okay? So after we get through this, please look at this. Other things I did not have time to discuss today is landfill and waste disposal. What's the disposal requirements of the corporations when they are getting rid of their waste? And where is it in community? What is the actual mitigation plan to make sure that it's not leaching in, again, both groundwater, soil, but also air? And what is that emissions and what is that process to make sure that they are doing their due diligence and discarding waste efficiently? And also, we know that our communities are undercounted in the census. So that is not reliable data. Of sole data that should be used as reliability to say this is where the community is and is located, because it's not always an accurate depiction of where communities actually live. Additional urban heat islands, hurricane and disaster, and the expanse spread of contaminants when there's hurricane and disasters that we know are coming more frequently to our shorelines. And economic data to track how many jobs are direct community investment by the community. I do want to give just feedback and credit to the reality is there are policies and there are red tape that sometimes disallow state departments from being able to engage with the permitting process beyond what they're doing. I want to acknowledge that. I understand that. I'm just pushing the limit here to talk about the impacts and what we're seeing cumulatively as we navigate around environmental justice transitions that Renee mentioned that is happening on the federal level that can in the future allow for us to have leverage to change policies, to actually address these cumulative impacts. And if we're talking about it now, it can influence the highest government now, right? But us as the Environmental Justice Equity Advisory Board, I would just recommend, this is my recommendation at the conclusion, and I thank you for your grace in allowing me to get through this. Engage with local elected leaders. I understand that there are state subsidies that do go to these corporations, but what we're seeing is a higher incidence of recruitment that's done by local elected leaders and local governments. And how can we make sure that we're engaging as a board just to inquire on the following? How long has the industry committed to staying in the area and providing jobs? This industry, it's not a long-term industry. And I'll just be very frank, the transition of wood pellets will not be used as fuel for a long time in the UK. It's not going to happen. And then Asia will follow. So as they're transitioning industry, how are we making sure to be in coalescement with local elected leaders who are going to be looking for jobs, right? Because that's the issue that we see that has been a fertile ground for industries to come into communities that are looking for jobs, is to say we have them. Right? So that would just be my recommendation, is us to be able to engage with local elected leaders to ask that question and then maybe be a source of encouragement, recommendations to begin to look at the manufacturing auto jobs that are coming into the state so that there's an incentivization for local elected leaders not to have to feel like they are pressured and relying on this one source of industry. And then to NCDAQ, I've already asked this question, but just what is the process of monitoring NVIVA to stay within the limits of the permits? And can there be inclusion of some of my recommendations in that permitting process and maybe other expansive recommendations that I wasn't able to conclude because they're smarter minds than mine? But is there room or leverage to be able to look at the process once they've received the permit? If we don't want it, but if that's the process, plan B, how can we make sure to engage to help to strengthen that process with you? And then I'll stop there and appreciate, again, the Impacted Communities Against Wood Pellet Coalition and their recommendations, and feel like they were deeply in alignment with a lot of addressing the health impacts and elaboration that I presented. I saw a lot of overlap and just wanted to elevate vocal support in what they are going through and grounding that real impact. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Wellington, for that presentation. We are a lot of valuable and very important information. And I think we can just, at this point, shift to public comment and then figure out how we're going to get our arms around this elephant a little later on. But I want to be respectful for the people who came, and we want to hear from you. And perhaps, if it's okay with you, we'll come back and have this conversation. But thank you so much for everything that you provided. If you have to take a break, go. I want to ask you why. But we're going to move forward with our public comment. Ms. Kramer.
So, just for everyone's awareness, we had 43 people sign up for public comments. So we are going to try and be very efficient in the order and go quickly and respect everyone's time. Sharon, you are unmuting. Okay, so up first we have Anita Cunningham, followed by Yvonne Moody.
Can I come up?
Oh, yeah. I was just not expecting you in person for some reason.
Okay,
I was looking at Sharon to unmute.
I
Okay.
will be brief. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for giving us this time. My name is Anita Cunningham. I am with the North Carolina Climate Solutions Coalition and the North Carolina Disaster Survival School. I live in Robeson County. As a community and environmental leader and advocate, I'm very concerned and also fearful for my community and communities that are in close proximity to the wood pellet production. The effects of the wood pellet production, as we have heard, are negatively affecting our environment and creating more harmful greenhouse gases. Human activity is the leading and continuous contributor to the increase of greenhouse gases, and the wood pellet production is one of those negative contributors. As a result of the greenhouse gases, it creates the warming effect on the climate. The air and the temperature levels increases and leads to disruption in water balances. And we know that that leads to increased intensity in hurricanes and flooding, as we have seen in my communities where they had to vote folks out the last time the hurricanes came through. Burning wood pellets produces 50% more greenhouse gases than the equivalent amount of coal. The industry claims that the carbon released when the trees are cut down and burned will be reabsorbed by planting new trees. This has been criticized by scientists. And when you talk about replanting trees, it takes 40 to 100 years for a tree to mature. I don't have 40 to 100 years, but there is time, and that time is now. Overall, the impact of increased greenhouse gases affects our climate, and the human toll is our communities. I ask you to seriously consider all of the information that you've heard in permitting expansion of this facility. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Up next, we have Yvonne Moody, followed by Maritza Mendoza. I think they're both online. If you are online and you are dialed in by phone, please press *3 to raise your hand, and then you'll have to press *6 to unmute. We will come back then at the end. Do we have a Maritza Mendoza?
Yes.
After Maritza is Joy Reeves. Saying.
Maritza should be unmuted.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Maritza Mendoza, and I live in North Carolina. While not in those communities, I just wanted to express my concern, and I really hope folks listen to the last two presentations and all that they had to say, because just simply, why would we approve of an air quality permit knowing that there are still so many concerns that have not been addressed, especially by communities who bear cumulative impacts and disproportionate burdens of all these public health concerns. And it does not make sense to approve any expansions before these concerns are addressed adequately and without proper engagement from as we've heard from other communities who are in the surrounding areas. And additionally, knowing the threat, as was mentioned, of the climate crises and the increased risk of flooding and all of those impacts, this industry is not contributing to any of our goals to increase renewable or clean energy production, and it rather continues the status quo of continuing our practices of extraction and deforestation. And so I really hope we, like folks, really think critically about whether this is good for any of us. And so thank you for providing this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Joy Reeves, followed by Jane Barnett. And Jane is online.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joy Reeves, and I am a Presidential Fellow at the Rachel Carson Council studying environmental economics and policy at Duke University. The Rachel Carson Council, a nonprofit environmental organization dedicated to preserving the legacy and advocacy of Rachel Carson and representing a national network of young environmental leaders, urges the NCDEQ to reject Enviva's expansion permit in Ahoskie. The RCC has studied and written about the wood pellet industry extensively, with 2 published reports, Clear Cut and Bad Business, which highlight the injustices and carbon impacts of the industry. Our primary concerns with biomass are not only for the lived experiences of those who live near the plant, but the false carbon accounting behind biomass itself. Burning wood pellets releases over 50% more CO2 than coal per megawatt hour, and the production process itself utilizes fossil fuels, diminishes forest biodiversity, contaminates water and air, endangers human health, and compromises disaster resilience. The permit in consideration would allow Enviva to emit 47% more greenhouse gases annually. Enviva would install VOC and HAP pollution control technology solely to justify emissions in a county whose poverty level is near 25%. On top of EJ violations, our concern is that no amount of state-of-the-art air quality control equipment can mask the flawed, carbon-intensive supply chain of biomass itself when you consider shipping the pellets to Europe. No matter how good biomass looks on paper or how convenient of a fallacy it may be for reaching renewable energy goals, our renewable energy goals only matter if they are rooted in facts. We are concerned that the full supply chain is not being evaluated. We believe in taking pride in our southern forests and therefore urge the NCDEQ to deny the expansion permit for Enviva. Thank you very much.
Up next is Jane Barnett, followed by Elizabeth Spraggins. And they are both online.
I believe I've sent Jane a request to unmute.
Jane, are you able to unmute by pressing *6? We cannot hear you if you are speaking.
Its name.
We will come back to you. Elizabeth Spraggins.
Ask her to raise her hand.
Elizabeth, if you are on, you'll need to press *3. Okay. Okay, so then up next we have Barbara Veliskakis, followed by Belinda Joyner. Again, if you're on the phone, please press *3.
Any raised hands on the call-ins? I do see Belinda Joyner online.
All right, Belinda Joyner, you are up next. Did you unmute her?
I sent her a request to unmute.
Okay. Linda, you will have to accept.
There she is.
Oh, great.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon. This is Belinda Joyner, Northampton County, and I heard Mike say earlier that he had worked with us here in Northampton County, and it's sad to say that we're in the same position now that we were then. Speaking of the monitors, he said there has been no complaints about dust. If the monitor that they set up at the high school was working as it's supposed to be, then we really wouldn't have to report any dust complaints because that's what that monitor is supposed to be doing. So it's just there, you know, taking up space and not really doing what it's supposed to be doing. But anyway, industrial logging and in vivo wood pellets has not helped our community. Our poverty level has gone up. Instead of you know, it's gotten worse, our economic outcome. We were over incentivized in Viva to come here, so our property tax has gone up 6%. Since between 2011 and 2019, the property, like I said, the property tax have gone up 6%, and you're talking about people on fixed incomes. So really we are paying where we are not getting anything from it. I want to know why the Commerce Department is directly targeting Tier 1 communities, as if you know, we are not human, and because we are Tier 1 communities, they feel like that they can just give us anything and we're supposed to take it. And to me, it's not fair. And it just, like I said, just seems like they use us as a dumping ground. And Viva, like I say, they have not helped the community, and if they would provide by what these so-called permits said that they should do with dust coverings and all this pollution, then when they got that Title V permit, a lot of stuff that was left out that DEQ and DAQ said that they're supposed to do, but then nobody's monitoring them to see that they're doing this. So in other words, we're still suffering as we were when it first came here. We have no help. It's like you're listening, but you're not hearing what's being said. So we're in the same predicament now that we were then. Thank you.
Thank you, Belinda Joyner. Up next, we have Ginger Minichiello, followed by Kay Raybold. If you are on the phone, reminder *3 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute.
Let's see here, we do have a call in you.
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
I am Jane Barnett of Moore County, a retired teacher and a student of the climate and the impact of Enviva plants. In regard to the urgent need for worldwide climate actions, the UK and the European Union are using biomass to meet their goals for the Paris Climate Accord. Enviva sends them millions of tons of North Carolina wood pellets yearly. Other countries, including Japan, are eyeing this to meet Paris Accord goals. Doubling the demand for wood southeastern forests will be decimated. Clear-cutting tens of thousands of acres of valuable carbon sinks reduces their CO2 capture immensely. Old-growth trees, many hardwoods, and wetland trees take decades to be replanted and grown. It's estimated only 12% of the wood for imported wood pellets is just residential forest waste, contrary to what the industry proposed when first permitted. Within the EU, the CO2 emitted by burning imported biomass is missing from carbon accounts due to international loopholes, skewing the picture of the carbon impacts of removing and burning forests for energy. The amount of energy expended and emissions caused by harvesting, transporting, chipping, heating to make pellets, transporting to ports, shipping across the Atlantic, and burning the pellets for power in Europe are very detrimental to the planet's goals of reducing carbon emissions this decade. Burning this fuel generates more emissions than using coal or gas for energy. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Any update on Ginger? Any other hand?
I have one other hand up on a phone line.
Hello? Hello? You should be unmuted. Maybe press
Yeah.
star. Oh, hello?
This is Derek.
Sorry?
This is Derek Bell.
Derek Bell, I don't think we have called your name yet.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, sorry. We'll come back to you. I see your name a little farther down. Okay, next we have Kay Raybold, followed by Alex Lines.
She's unmuted.
Kay Raybold, you should be unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my name's Kay Rebold. I'm a volunteer with Apple, the Alliance to Protect the People and Places We Live. I want to start by offering my gratitude to the Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Board for all you're doing to protect the EJ communities in North Carolina. We need your involvement, your care, and your expertise. I appreciate your recent letter to the North Carolina DEQ concerning the wood pellet industry in North Carolina, and specifically the Enviva wood pellet facility in Ahoskie. I share all the concerns which were outlined in your letter and make these few following recommendations, which I hope the board will bring to the attention to DEQ. And also I would acknowledge most of these points have been made earlier. Please recommend to DEQ that it deny Enviva's permit to expand its wood pellet production. Toxic emissions at the plant must be better monitored and efforts made to control the significant dust and noise pollution. The massive trucks leaving and entering the facility need to be covered. To expand the wood pellet production at this facility would deepen the impact of air and noise pollution, which create factors resulting in poor health for the neighboring community. I want to mention that the U.S. is a signatory to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. For this reason, the state of North Carolina and DEQ should be reminded that it's important that the Indigenous Meherrin tribe is consulted about Enviva's plans in the community in the application review process. Another issue is that DEQ should reclassify this facility as a major source of emissions rather than a minor source. Finally, I'm asking the board to recommend that DEQ acknowledge and measure the greenhouse gas emissions caused by industrial logging in North Carolina. Trees are a precious resource with countless life-giving gifts to the air we breathe, the soil, and the water. They are our kin, our brothers and sisters in the life community, and they deserve to be treasured and protected.
Thank you, Kay. Your time has come to a close. As a reminder, you can always submit written comments to ej@ncdenr.gov. Thank you. Up next, we have Alex Lines, followed by Janet Few. Okay, Alex, if you're on the phone, please press *3, raise your hand. Janet Few, T-A-E-W. Okay. Janet, if you're on the phone also, please go ahead and press *3. Raise hands. Okay, we'll go ahead and keep moving. Heather Hilliker. All right, Heather, you've been unmuted.
Good evening. My name's Heather Hilliker, and I'm with the Southern Environmental Law Center. My comments tonight focus on one of the primary concerns expressed by those living next to Enviva's pellet mills throughout the state: exposure to fugitive dust. This dust comes from several parts of the manufacturing process, and inhalation can cause serious health problems, including damage to the lungs and respiratory system. For years, community members have publicly expressed concerns about the impact that this dust is having on their health and well-being. To the extent that it's been suggested tonight that no fugitive dust complaints have been made for the Northampton or other facilities in recent years, that is misleading. There does not appear to be any clear formal mechanism for community members to submit formal complaints, but complaints have been made. These complaints have repeatedly been made through written and oral public comments for proposed permits. Video and photographic evidence, as well as firsthand accounts captured in news stories, have also been presented to DEQ. Despite this evidence, DEQ has not required Enviva to put in place any additional protections to reduce dust exposure, claiming at times that they don't have the authority to require more because they themselves have not seen dust leaving Enviva's property. Such a narrow interpretation of DEQ's authority is not supported by the regulatory text, which allows for DEQ to require a dust plan based off of substantive complaints supported by any, quote, physical evidence of excess dust. This includes either evidence that can be visibly observed leaving the facility's fence line or dust that is, quote, settled on adjacent property, of which DEQ has ample evidence. Currently, only the Ahoskie facility has a dust plan in place, and as laid out in written comments on the proposed permit, even that plan falls short of what's needed to reduce dust and protect local communities. We therefore call on DEQ to strengthen the fugitive dust plan for Ahoskie in the ways suggested in our comments. And moreover, given the prevalence of this concern for communities living next to the pellet mills throughout the state, we ask that DEQ put in place strong site-specific fugitive dust plans at each facility. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Up next, we have Will Harlan, followed by Nancy Moore. I don't think we have a Will Harlan, so if you're on the phone, once again, please press *3. Nancy. Okay, Nancy Moore, if you are on the phone, you could also go ahead and press *3. All right, we will come back to them. Next, we have Kimberly Fox, followed by Tassala Rafai. Okay, any names I just called, or please go ahead and press *3. Okay, next, I'm sorry in advance if I say this wrong, Xiao Ying Li, followed by Reverend Mac Ledgerton. And go ahead and press *3 if you're on the phone. Any of them? Okay. Next, we have Deborah David.
I have one raised hand.
Okay. We will go ahead to the raised hand. You'll have to. Oh. Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Deborah David, and I'm from Richmond County, North Carolina.
Oh, great. Your time already began. You can go ahead.
Okay. My name is Deborah David, and I live in Richmond County, down the street from the Enviva plant. And when the Enviva plant first came, we was granted, the plant was granted permit despite a lawsuit brought against NCDEQ for lack of public input. Additionally, local residents were denied public comments by their local county commissioners about the Enviva plant on multiple occasions, and what legal experts called a clear example of a violation of the First Amendment. Now, I'm living right down the street from the plant, and I'm on the same road, Highway 177, and multiple trucks, up to have encountered up to 200 trucks a day, being uncovered with dust, wood chips, logs, also trains riding on the railroad track, and I live about 5 houses from the train rail. And dust is falling off of these trucks and trains, even coming from the plant. A lot of dust up at the plant. For this area where I live, it's only 300 residents, and it's 99.9% black. And it is very hard living here in some parts of this down from Enviva because of the dust. Having to wash your cars regular because the dust getting on the windshields and all. If you drive behind the trucks, dust is falling all on your cars. The chips are falling off the trucks because they're not covered. We're having a high rate of asthma in this area as we speak. I thank you for letting me speak tonight. And there's one thing I do want to say. Enviva passes out turkeys. How do we know the turkeys aren't full of dust? Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Ruby Bell. And then followed by William Muma.
Turkey's full of dust. Okay, I'm Ruby Bell from Sampson County. I live approximately 5 miles from the Enviva plant. I'm concerned about all the issues that Enviva is causing in my community. When I speak with neighbors near the facility, they have lots of complaints. Most of them are afraid to speak up because they don't feel that their voices will be heard. Their feeling is, what's the use? Meaning that the county and the state government are going to do whatever they want to do with no concern for them. Case in point, the community was not 100% in agreement with Enviva coming to Sampson County. There were rallies, meetings, and speeches. However, the county moved ahead with the project and gave Enviva $2.9 million in subsidies. Other concerns consist of noise pollution, truck traffic, and fire hazard. The air quality is another major problem. Lots of contaminants are thrust into the air, which would include wood dust, poisonous carbon monoxide, nitrogen, and other hazardous air pollutants that can cause health problems. I visited the community to speak with one of the residents who lived very close to the facility. We sat outside for about 20 minutes. When I left to go home, my nose was running, my eyes were running water and itching, and I had a cough. The next morning, I had lots of mucus in my throat, still coughing, eyes still burning, and my nose still running. Research indicates that some of the same toxins that cause my respiratory discomfort can also cause other health problems. Secretary Michael Reagan quotes, "Together we will protect our natural resources, our economic interests in our communities so that all North Carolinians will have clean air and clean water for today, tomorrow, and future generations to come. I strongly urge the Environmental Justice and Equity Board to take a long, hard look at the quote and support all the recommendations presented tonight to help us have cleaner environment, reduce harmful toxins so that we can all have clean air, clean water for today, for tomorrow, and for the future." Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have William Muma, followed by, it says Joe, J-O-H, Dreyfors. I don't know if that was a typo, it's supposed to be John, or if it's Joe. We have
William Muma.
Okay, William, you are next.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I'm William Muma, who is a climate scientist, and I want to just make a few comments about this whole issue. I'm a researcher and publisher on bioenergy and its effects. The changes in climate are accelerating. We're already passing irreversible tipping points and approaching others that will cause even more serious damage from intense storms and flooding, droughts, fires, and extreme events. The damage from both the production of wood pellets and climate change is disproportionately felt by low-income communities. Cutting and burning forests for energy is a double impediment to reining in a raging climate. First, when wood is burned, it releases more carbon dioxide immediately than does any coal or any other fossil fuel to produce the same amount of energy or heat or electricity. Second, the forests that would have kept on growing would have accumulated 3 to 10 times as much carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere by 2100 as would the regrowth cut forest that will take at least as many years to come back as the age of the harvested forest to get back where it was originally. Deferred carbon neutrality is not useful. We cannot wait beyond 2030 and 2050 to get to net zero. And a direct statement from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change earlier this year said that safeguarding biodiversity and ecosystems is fundamental to climate resilient development in light of the threats climate change poses to them and their roles in adaptation and mitigation. They recommend we need to be protecting 30 to 50% of Earth's land, freshwater, and ocean areas, including currently near natural ecosystems. And at the climate meeting in Egypt yesterday, it was reported that the loss of biodiversity is already significantly affecting regional and global climate changes. And natural ecosystems play an important role in regulating climate, sequestering and storing carbon, and the loss of forests and draining of wetlands has contributed significantly to climate change. There is no reason for North Carolina.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Your time has come to an end. You can submit written comments, ej@ncdner.gov. Next, we have Joe or John Dreyfors. Do we have? Okay. If you're on the phone, you can press *3. Following them, we have Sam Davis and then Chris Hahn.
Sam Davis.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Hi, my name's Sam Davis. I'm a conservation scientist with Dogwood Alliance. I earned my PhD in 2015, and I've been a practicing ecologist working on forest, climate change, and biodiversity for more than a decade. I'd like to speak tonight about the greenhouse gas emissions of the forestry industry, which includes Enviva's operations across the U.S. While DAQ may cheer about a 23% reduction in greenhouse gases, this is because they are not accounting for the true cost of certain industries, like the wood pellet industry. When properly accounted for, forestry emissions in North Carolina are likely around 44 million metric tons of carbon dioxide per year, which is number 3 in the state, just behind transportation and electricity. Currently, North Carolina's DEQ does not accurately and transparently measure the greenhouse gas emissions of industrial logging in North Carolina. Instead, they provide a net estimate that includes emissions from machinery, but does not include the carbon lost from the trees that are removed. We're recommending the DEQ acknowledge and measure the greenhouse gas emissions of industrial logging in North Carolina in a few different ways. First, updating the carbon accounting methodology of the land use and forestry sector in the state's greenhouse gas emissions inventory. An update would allow DEQ to properly account for trees lost as well as machinery emissions. Second, cataloging the emissions of the forestry industry separate from any net growth benefits from forests. Third, perform more detailed accounting of forest health and age within Enviva's sourcing radius. This would ensure that forests are not being further degraded by Enviva's practices. And finally, we recommend the DEQ evaluate North Carolina carbon dioxide emissions from the wood pellet industry for compliance with EO 80. This includes carbon dioxide emissions from the pellet manufacturing facilities themselves, as well as any logging and transportation emissions associated with those facilities. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions that you may have.
Thank you. Up next, we have Chris Hahn, followed by Lib Hutchby.
Hello, my name is Dr. Chris Hahn, and I'm an environmental scientist with the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network. I'm here to expand on some of Professor Whittington's comments on cumulative impacts. I want you to remember those 2 words because in her presentation, she talked about, in particular, the Title V industries that are allowed permits to pollute. However, those are not the only polluting industries in these counties. For example, our organization has been able to track and monitor the air pollution impacts of CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeding operations, in which there are thousands across eastern North Carolina, many, particularly in Sampson County and others. They do not have to apply for an air polluting permit, even though we've been able to document respiratory issues coming from directly hog waste getting into people's houses, homes, lungs, all those things. And so we know that there are air pollution problems coming from industries that do not have to apply for those permits. There's a large cumulative impact on these communities already. We do not have to expand things that we already know are harmful. We've been able to track methane from swine CAFOs in particular, But something that we have not been able to track is from poultry CAFOs, because DEQ does not have to monitor those things. So actually the number of poultry CAFOs is a black box because there's no permitting process. We know that those are polluted. I was just in Richmond County this weekend where people were talking about the same problems of dealing with particulate matter coming from waste and litter from poultry, chicken houses, tons of chickens and poultry that are able to emit these wastes and everything. We do not document or track any of those things. So we have incredible limited capacity to actually monitor the air pollution that goes on. To expand something that we know already exists at this point is extremely unethical, and you have the power to not do it. Do not expand this permit. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Lib Husby, followed, we don't have Lib, okay. She did sign up for in-person, and I didn't see her, so. Then we have Claudia Steiner, followed by Derek Bell. Hopefully Derek is still on the phone.
Okay, thank you. I assume I can be heard now. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I'm sorry I could not quite get there in person. The doors were locked to the DEQ at the time that I got there because of the traffic on I-40. So quickly, let me say that I support all of the people who come, and I really, truly respect all the folks who have come so far and made presentations about their experience as impacted people. In front of me, actually, I'm parked in a parking lot here in Raleigh. I have the Enviva's 2021 Corporate Sustainability Report that I wanted to bring to show you. And I was totally shocked by this because, or should I say, we shouldn't be too shocked by the way that they put out their written material. It's really beautiful. It says that their mission is to displace coal, grow more trees, and fight climate change. But I can say to you personally that having read Enviva's website specific to sustainability, that I found my experience with trees and their words not compatible. And what I'm hearing tonight from the residents close to the Enviva plant is their experience with what was reported is incompatible with some of the monitoring in regards to noise and dust and the health issues. So I want to appreciate again the fact that DEQ has the power to say no to this permit, and I insist that you listen. This is why this advisory board is so important, that you have listened. You are listening, and you continue to do that, and you continue to support people who understand that trees are more important than money, and life is more important than money.
Thank you. You can submit your comments via email. I know you know how to find me. You've done it before. Thank you. Okay. Up next, we have Claudia Steiner, followed by Derek Bell. Claudia, if you're on the phone, you can go ahead and press *3. Do we still have Derek? All right. Derek Bell? Derek Bell, you might have to press *6 to unmute. No, you know you could do it. You were there just a minute ago. No. *6, Derek? Okay.
Already?
Yes. Okay. You may begin.
I am Derek Bell. I live near the Viva facility in Sampson County. My focus tonight is air quality. Making wood pellets creates lots of pollution that contaminates our air and water and can cause many health troubles for us. They produce wood dust, poisonous carbon monoxide, nitrogen, and other hazardous air pollutants. The wood dust released into the community is especially harmful. It enters our bloodstreams and lungs and can harm our breathing, worsen asthma, may cause heart attacks, premature death, and it collects on our cars, our porches, and in our yards. Serious explosions and fires can occur at Enviva facilities and have occurred in Sampson County. On Friday, April 30th, 2021, according to ABC Channel 11 News, 8 county fire departments responded to battle a blaze at the Sampson County wood pellet facility. Officials said a pile of mulch caught fire and advanced to neighboring woods. The fire prompted precautionary closure of the facility. May 1st, 2021, from the Post, headline reads, "Fire breaks out at Enviva wood pellet plant with history of environmental violations." In that article, it states that according to the NC Department of Environmental Quality Records, Enviva has accumulated 5 air quality violations at the Sampson County plant since 2017. These include excess emissions of carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, and particulate matter in violation of the facility's air permit. Earlier in the year, DEQ fined the company $7,300 in civil penalties for equipment failures in 2020 that resulted in violations of the permit. The article indicates that this was the second fire at the Sampson facility and provided another date of April 8th. Enviva of Sampson County recently had another fire. I was unable to collect information regarding that event. I'm sure DEQ is aware. My mother is a cancer survivor, thank God. This wood pellet industry releases dust, pollution, and poisonous gas into the air surrounding our community that are harmful to human health, and long-term exposure can cause cancer, and this certainly poses a trouble for me and my family. If you were in my shoes, would you want your mother to live in an environment that was harmful to her health? I strongly ask that the board support all the recommendations presented tonight to help us have a cleaner environment and reduce these harmful toxins. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Up next, we have Kathy Claiborne, followed by Evelyn Arrington. Kathy or Evelyn, if you are on the phone, please press *3. We have a hand. Okay, we have a hand. You can press *6 to unmute yourself. Hello? Hello? Swear I heard.
Hello?
Here we are. Hello? You're here.
Hello?
Yes, hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Evelyn Arrington. I actually live in Northampton County, Garrettsburg, North Carolina, approximately 1.8 miles from the Enviva plant. I have a couple of concerns that has been directly impacting me and my family since I bought property here in 2009. I've noticed a difference, definitely a lot of dust. I'm having more, I actually have asthma myself, so I have noticed that since Enviva has come next door to us, that I myself have had more asthma attacks, more sinus, chronic sinus infections that I'm constantly going back and forth to the doctor for. So I definitely think that the dust, pollution is affecting almost all of us in this neighborhood. It definitely is affecting my household. I also have noticed the noise. 2009, it was a very peaceful place to live when I first originally came here. Now you can barely sleep at night. You have so much noise, and you hear the knocking almost constantly all night long. I have noticed on Sunday, as I'm having my morning coffee on my porch, where we do have a church directly in front, or there is a church directly in front of the Enviva plant. Now, I have noticed that on Sunday morning, they extend a courtesy, and you do not hear that knocking, at least from about 8 o'clock to about 12. And I'm assuming that's a courtesy extended to the church. Well, after that, you hear it all night long. So, you know, I do believe that same courtesy needs to be extended to the residents around the area as it is with the church on Sunday morning. So basically, I've noticed also, it's been my experience, I'm traveling down the road, we see a lot of debris from the trucks dropping off into the highway.
Thank you for your comment. If you could provide any follow-up via email, ej@ncdnr.gov. Thank you so much. Okay, up next we have Emily Zucchino. Unless we had Kathy. Wait, pause, Emily. I'm so sorry. We might have Kathy on the phone. You have a hand. All right, you are unmuted on our end. Hello?
Hello?
Yes. Is this Kathy?
This is Kathy Claiborne. Yes.
Great. You may begin. Hello? Hello? Kathy?
Still unmuted.
Kathy, we can no longer hear you if you're talking.
Hello?
Oh, hello. Hi.
You hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
My name is Kathy Claiborne, and I'm from North County. Practically, I live right behind Enviva. And since I was here before the plant got here, and I suffer with bronchitis, and I can't even sit outside now because the dust is so terrible. The noise is just pathetic. Can't even sleep at night, and I have to get up the next morning and go to work. I'd be just as tired. So we have made complaints after complaints, and nothing has never been done yet.
Thank you, Kathy. Did you have more?
No, I'm finished.
Okay, thank you. Okay, up next then we have Emily Zucchino, followed by Julia Williams.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Emily Zucchino, and I'm with Dogwood Alliance and the Impacted Communities Against Wood Pellets Coalition. Try to keep it brief. I want to speak about a concern that's been noted in other areas with so many issues that don't really have a forum for discussion when the only opportunity for public comment we have is an air quality permit, which granted has a lot of concerns. But this permit also has a massive expansion of production, and there's no forum to express concerns about the impact of that expansion. And so I want to talk a little bit about what we mean when we talk about forest impact, because the industry talks about forest health and forest growth in a way that's very misleading and doesn't really get to the complexity of the issue. Since the state began measuring forest acreage in 1952, forest area in North Carolina has declined. In the 1950s, there were almost no plantation forests, and since then, monocrop pine plantations have replaced about 15% of all native North Carolina forests. Pine plantations are 95% less biodiverse than natural forests and do not store nearly as much carbon as natural forests. They are vulnerable to high winds and flooding. Enviva's appetite for both hardwood and softwood forests is leading to the destruction of our native forests and the replacement of those forests with pine plantations. Recent academic and scientific studies analyzing satellite imagery around Enviva's facilities concluded that it was very likely that Enviva's pellet mill operations contributed to the loss of hardwood trees. Forests in North Carolina have also gotten much younger. Roughly half of all forests are under 40 years old, and the average age of trees Enviva uses is 33 years old. These trees, if replaced at all, are replaced by seedlings and saplings. Enviva claims that its practices are sustainable because forest inventories are increasing. Yet Enviva's own information shows that Enviva is responsible for clear-cutting forests, including ecologically critical bottomland hardwood forests. Furthermore, no amount of sustainable forestry will change the fact that burning wood for electricity is putting more carbon into the atmosphere than burning fossil fuels. Thank you. Thank you for holding this special session.
Okay, up next we have Julia Williams, followed by Ann Stewart, and they're both supposed to be on that. Okay, we have a hand. Press *6 to unmute. Hello?
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julia Williams. I spend 8 to 9 hours a day with my 92-year-old mom, Miss Mally Boxfeld, who lives approximately 3/10 of a mile from the individual plant in Fayetteville, North Carolina, located in Sampson County. My mother has experienced a smell coming from the wood pellet facility since its opening in 2016. The smell comes through the windows in the rooms on the side of the house facing the Enviva facility. The smell was so strong that she had to move into another bedroom away from that end of the house, where she has been sleeping now for several years. I believe that is important and a right for an individual to be able to live in, sleep where they wish, and enjoy their home as they retire after working hard their entire life. My mom has been denied that privilege. My mom also suffers from sarcoidosis and asthma. For those of you who don't know, sarcoidosis comes with shortness of breath and wheezing triggered by dust and chemicals. The wood pellet production creates fugitive dust pollution that contaminates our air, which can aggravate and cause severe breathing problems for these conditions. My mom loves being outdoors, but has refused to visit outside as much as she has in the past because of the poor air quality surrounding our neighborhood. I strongly ask that the Environment Justice Advisory Board support all the recommendations presented tonight to help us to have a cleaner environment and reduce these harmful toxins. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, then, we have Ann Stewart, followed by Richie Harding. Ann Stewart, you've been unmuted. Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Super, thank you. My name is Ann Stewart, and I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback. Hang on. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear us?
I'm sorry. Yes, I can now. I apologize.
Okay.
Would you start over for me? Thank you. Oh, sorry. I have an issue I want to discuss, which is Enviva's financial plan and why it's important as you consider this permit. The plan is exceedingly flawed. It's fundamentally based on a continuation of subsidies, which are, as we speak, being critically scrutinized by and increasingly limited by the governments in the EU and UK, where our forests go to be burned. Added to Enviva's precarious viability from its dependence on foreign subsidies are the over $9.5 million they receive from North Carolina taxpayers, ironically, from the very communities they impact negatively. Any one card removed from this house of cards will tumble its business model quicker than it's cutting down our forests. Enviva is dangerously leveraged, raising capital with promises of profits that will never be fulfilled once these subsidies are gone. It's an egregious waste of taxpayer money, and that of the very people Enviva is harming and are nonetheless contributing their tax dollars to that harm. Subsidies and tax breaks should not grow to prop up an industry to create source of energy that's unsustainable and inefficient. And may I say that Enviva's literature about wood pellets favorably compares to coal is completely unsubstantiated by science. Rather, I want my tax dollars and those of fellow North Carolinians to be used to develop truly clean energy to be used here in the United States, in North Carolina. Why is this plan important? Studies have found that the wood pellet manufacturing plants are 50% more likely to be located in an EJ community in Southeast US. If allowed to proceed, Once the forests are depleted, Enviva will move on, just like the coal companies in West Virginia and Eastern Kentucky did, and those communities will be left worse off than before. We need North Carolina to support legitimate growth in these deprived communities, not a company that is going to cut down the trees and leave.
Thank you. Up next, we have Richie Harding, followed by Reich Longest. Richie? All right, Richie, you've been unmuted.
All right. One of the first people that I heard, gentleman, I couldn't get his last name. His first name was Mike A. He said that there was no dust from Enviva. Jonathan Vigliotti, he was a reporter with CBS Morning News, which is hosted by Gayle King. They came here to Garrisburg and they interviewed Don Calloway, who's the Vice President of Equity, Inclusion, and Impact at Enviva. That title lets you know that there's someone working in that organization that's there to make sure that people of color are taken care of. Just as Mike said, he said that there's no dust that comes from that facility, nor does that facility use trunks of trees. They use the remains of clear cuts, the things that are left behind from companies that make paper and make other wood products. As I ride around Northampton County, there are plenty of clear cuts that have wood leftovers, where there are drone shots of Enviva that has tree trunks. But CBS Morning News, New York Times, reporters from PBS of NC, Japan, and Denmark, and et cetera, have found that there are dust-storm properties that are encamping this facility. We met with the Northampton County Board of County Commissioners because the Northampton County facility is located in a light industrial zone. We're trying to sneak in a hearing to rezone that area to heavy industrial. That didn't happen in 2015, and no public notice to rezone has come forth since then. With that being said, Enviva cannot meet air quality standards because it is operating illegally. All noise and dust leaving the borders of this facility is a violation. And as I said, air monitoring, I am that board member that served on Northampton County Board of Education. As chair of finance and facilities, I oversaw the installation of that air monitoring station. It sat there for months with no power. And about 3 weeks before the Title V hearing in Northampton County, power was hooked up to, and they told us at that time that none of that data that came through that power station was of any good to be used by DEQ or DAQ or anyone else. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Reich Longest, followed by Rita Frost. Reich, you have been unmuted.
Hello. Hello. Reich Longest. I'm the director of the Duke Environmental Law and Policy Clinic. I wanted to talk very quickly about the choices that DEQ has to make and the DEQ has made. We heard earlier about the way in which DAQ has now achieved compliance with the Clean Air Act. That's a great milestone. And now it's time to achieve compliance with the Civil Rights Act, which is even older than the Clean Air Act. DEQ has made a lot of choices over the years. They've chosen not to regulate noise, even though the North Carolina Constitution clearly has that as one of the powers. And under the Reagan administration, EPA abdicated that responsibility to the states. DAQ also chose not to enact more stringent rules on fugitive dust emissions. In fact, in 2018, when those rules were up for readoption, they actually made it easier for fugitive dust industry and actually reduced the accountability on those areas. And when we see the hearing officer's report on the specific permit that we're talking about with the Northampton facility in responding to the neighbors' complaints about dust, he cites specifically to this very rule to say there really is no dust because it's not a substantive complaint, and cites to this 15 NCAC 2D 540. What's in those rules is not just given to DEQ. It's not just given to DAQ. They made those choices. They specifically made choices about what to amend and what not to amend, what to strengthen and what not to strengthen. Earlier, departmental leaders made clean air a priority. And that's why we achieved all of that compliance with the Clean Air Act criteria pollutants. It's time now for DAQ to step up and exercise leadership and make choices that will actually protect neighbors from noise, protect neighbors from dust, and protect neighbors from fugitive emissions from these pellet facilities. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Up next, we have Rita Frost. Okay, followed by Patrick Anderson. Rita, you've been unmuted.
Hello.
Hi,
you all
we
hear
can
me?
hear you. Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Rita. I work at Dogwood Alliance. For the past 7 years, I have been responsible for tracking and tracing Enviva in the field, as well as leading Dogwood's international campaigns. What has become absolutely obvious to me is that Enviva is a result of deranged European climate subsidies, which incentivize the destruction of our forests and harm to our communities so that European power companies can check bureaucratic boxes. North Carolina's investment in Enviva, both by state subsidies and tax exemptions, as well as regulatory go-ahead, is one that is risky because it is entirely reliant on foreign and domestic subsidies remaining. Policy shifts in major importing countries like the UK, the Netherlands, and country blocs like the EU show that when the industry loses government favor in importing countries, there will be little demand for pellets created here in North Carolina. North Carolina is taking a huge risk in betting on an industry that is dependent on policy decisions made an ocean away. So let's discuss some of the changes we've already seen. In 2018, the UK government banned any new industrial scale biomass power stations from being built. In 2021, the Netherlands government ruled that no new subsidies for woody biomass would be granted until a phase-out plan was created. In May of 2022, a committee of the EU Parliament voted to end subsidies for biomass. If that's upheld, it will drastically change the market for this industry. Finally, Enviva is subject to scrutiny both in the legal arena and in the financial sector. Just last month, an investor group stated that, quote, Enviva is a dangerously levered serial capital raiser whose deteriorating cash conversion and unprofitability will drain it of cash next year, end quote. Enviva is misleading policymakers, investors, and the public, and I urge us to not be fooled as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Patrick Anderson, followed by Hannah Jeffries. Okay, Patrick, you're unmuted.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, my name is Patrick Anderson. I'm an attorney with the Environmental Integrity Project. I want to dig into the acrolein issue. Acrolein is an extremely acute air toxic that causes respiratory symptoms even in very low concentrations. For instance, under federal CERCLA reporting rules, acrolein has one of the lowest mandatory reporting thresholds of any pollutant, lower than lead and the same as arsenic and asbestos. In North Carolina, the largest source of acrolein emissions in 2020 was a tire burning power plant that emitted 15,047 pounds of acrolein. But Enviva Ahoskie calculates it will emit 16,000 pounds, just under, but still, per year if they're allowed to expand, making it potentially the largest source in the state. To protect human health from toxics like acrolein, DAQ requires sources to demonstrate that their emissions do not cause exceedances of health-based standards known as acceptable ambient levels. Unfortunately, North Carolina's ambient standard for acrolein is extremely outdated. It was formulated in 1987 using methodology that DAQ now considers obsolete. More importantly, North Carolina's 1987 standard is far higher than more recent standards established in other states using newer science and better medical studies. Where North Carolina's standard is 80 micrograms per cubic meter, in 2014, Texas, of all states, implemented a standard of just 3.2 micrograms per cubic meter. California's 2008 standard is even lower at 2.5 micrograms per meter. And here's the most important point. Enviva's own modeling shows that the Ahoskie plant will cause significant exceedances of both the Texas and California standards in the communities surrounding the plant. The board should therefore recommend that DAQ modify Ahoskie's draft permit to prevent these exceedances by reducing acrolein emissions. This is exactly the kind of power an agency should have in an EJ community to do the right thing. And beyond that, we really think the DAQ should revise their statewide acrolein standards based on the best science. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Hannah Jeffries, followed by Denzel Burnside. Denzel Burnside here. Oh, great.
Chin, Asaenehe. Hello and how are you? Yaka Haka was, Gawa Setwaga, Dice Dice. My name is She Has a Good Path. I'm a Heron Nation citizen and a member of the Snipe Clan. Sorry guys, I'm super nervous. I'm also the Meherrin speaker from the Ahoskie hearing as well. I wanted to tell you guys something I recently witnessed. Our powwows are typically in October, the first weekend, and due to Hurricane Ian, we had to reschedule a couple weeks later. So I hadn't been able to get up to Ahoskie, the homelands, in quite some time. I was last there in May. During the powwow and being on committee, I'm running around frantic trying to get things in order. But I took a few moments to actually leave, and as I left, I noticed directly across from our tribal grounds, there's a land that was for sale. We're still trying to figure that out. They're roughly about 130 acres. Well, the tall standing timber of it, roughly 60 acres, has now been clear cut all the way down, leaving a pile of stumps. And I assure you, this is not softwood. These are hardwood, oaks. So the issue is literally at our front door. We've heard notifications have been sent to the Meherrin tribe. Well, I'm here to let you know, after speaking to my chief, my chairman, my council, members of my general body, we were not aware fully of Enviva, what the industry was doing to the community. We knew we needed jobs, but exactly what those impacts were going to be for us. Saturday during that powwow, and after seeing that clear cut, I was enraged. And it seems like I sensed the energy of the earth because it was very much hurting and wanting to be healed. I'll be very quick, and I'm sorry about this. I broke down crying and sobbing, and I had to leave tribal grounds in fear of someone to see me and knowing they're very protective of me and don't want to hurt their little Hannah here. But I asked that DEQ to strengthen tribal consultation and understand that notification versus meaningful consultation is different. We only have a double-wide office on our tribal grounds. We don't even have the capacity to have someone in office or a tribal phone. So for us, it's great that there are standards put in place, but not all tribal communities and government are equal. Compared to where I live in Robeson County, home of the Lumbees, who are 60,000 to 80,000 enrolled members, the Meherrin have roughly 1,200 to 1,500, and that's being extremely generous. I was the only one in my 30s who even helped out powwow the entire weekend. We simply do not have the capacity, and it's taking generations like myself to even be trained up so that way we can learn the rules, so we can play the game with you. I'm currently a grad student at the University of Arizona in Heritage Conservation, and I have my bachelor's in American Indian Studies. So I just ask DEQ, please, don't just send a letter, come knock on our door. Thank you.
So, Burnside, followed by Kathy Buckley.
I'm going to keep my comments pretty brief. I work for Dogwood Alliance, and I happen to be the North Carolina campaign manager working on policy effectively within the legislature. I just want to give you a couple key points. We just recently, I know everybody knows, we just recently celebrated Warren County. I got a chance to see the professor there, the birthplace of environmental justice. And I think it's important that a couple of things. The people who are in the room, I'm from out of the country, out of the state, so I get a chance to see this from a very uniquely lens coming from Florida. And we've been in deep discussions with DEQ, and we appreciate you all for being in DAQ. But one of the problems that we came across was with the Commerce Department being a direct lobbying force to inform us that these industries they have no oversight over, they have no control over, but they are marketing to be able to bring them into the state. And when we made the suggestion to say, could there be some format of oversight, some format of regulation, there was a pushback to say, of course, that at this point there is nothing that they could offer. We've been in conversation with the governor's office as well, as trying to get him to be a little bit more informed about the issue, and we've gotten nothing more than pushbacks. One of our greater concerns is that we see that at least 99% of the harm is touching indigenous, as Hannah spoke out, and Black and Hispanic communities, but 1% of all of this is being concentrated by white land ownership. That does not map out to what we see in Eastern North Carolina. One of the things that we brought up to the Commerce Department is, why does it seem like all of the Tier 1 communities and everything in terms of industries that are desirable go to Western North Carolina, but the industries that aren't desirable seem to always make it to the eastern side of North Carolina? And when we look at the maps that the doctor presented today, or to the professor presented today, we know that there's a racial disparity concern. So I think we need to really, really have a conversation that we keep trying to underline and push side on the eastern side of North Carolina. These communities have already exacerbated health issues. So I just wanted to put that in front of you. Thank you very much. Any concern, and we want to be in assistance. We're Dogwood Alliance, so please feel free to use us as a resource. Thank you.
Thank you. Last two speakers, we have Kathy Buckley up next, followed by Carol Richardson. Kathy Buckley, you've been unmuted. We cannot hear you if you are speaking, Kathy. So make sure you are unmuted on your end. We still cannot hear you. She's unmuted. She's unmuted. Oh. Hello? You heard something?
She just left the meeting.
Okay. All right. We are going to move on. Carol Richardson. Carol Richardson, you're unmuted. Carol, we cannot hear you if you're speaking. Please make sure you're unmuted on your end. Still cannot hear you. Okay. Well, as she does not seem to be there, she's unmuted on our end and she's not speaking. But okay, well, since we are well over the 8 o'clock end time, thanks everyone for bearing with us as we work through virtual and in person. And Chair, I'll pass back to you.
Thank you. And on behalf of the advisory board, including members who spoke tonight, let me thank all of you for taking the time to provide incredibly helpful information in this matter. That November 28th date is of substantial concern, and I am hopeful. I know that we as an advisory board will take seriously everything that we've heard, and I hope DEQ does the same thing, and I hope that we don't move forward quickly by November 28th. I hope we take the time to seriously evaluate what we've heard today and make a decision that reflects the best interests of our state and, most importantly, the communities that have borne the brunt of environmental injustices in this country.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, this is Carol. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear. Is it okay?
Good evening. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you guys, but good evening. My name is Carol T. Richardson, and I'm with Robeson County Cooperative for Sustainable Development and Impacted Community Coalition Against Wood Pellets. I'm a community organizer, and South Lumberton, North Carolina will always be home for me. Robeson County was devastated by Hurricane Matthew and Florence. There was water everywhere. I lived in the country part of Lumberton that was surrounded by trees, and I can remember my daughter and I having to wade through high waters just to try and make it to our car. It was one of the worst experiences in my life, and although there was plenty of water, it was nowhere near the amount of water that my family and friends experienced that lived in the city area of Lumberton, where there are less trees. As we all made it to safe shelters, I can remember my uncle saying something to me that stuck, and it was, be thankful of those trees that surround your house because they stop most of the water that could have flooded inside your home. The trees absorb a lot of water, and they are also a barrier that move water in certain directions when there are enough of them. They are also our #1 natural resource for removing and storing carbon. They are also natural air conditioners, providing shade and protecting our people in places we live from heat stress, drought, and rising temperatures. Although the wood pellet facility in Lumberton is now closed, Enviva continues to come into our county and destroy our forests, transporting trees to Hamlet to make wood pellets there. Then they put them on trains to Wilmington and send our valuable natural resources overseas to be burned. Enviva's entire mission is to take our forests and destroy them to make a product, most of which is exported and burned, a process that impacts our weather and climate worse than burning coal. This industry is not good for North Carolina or our nation. There are better, cleaner, and real forms of renewable energy available to us at a much cheaper cost to our economic, environmental, and public health. I ask the advisory board to advise the secretary without mincing words that there are many reasons within their power and authority to deny this Enviva permit to expand production and to inform other state officials that the wood pellet industry is in total contradiction to the mission of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, that's you.
What was I saying? Thank you. Again, I think that it is incumbent upon us as an advisory board to take seriously everything that we've heard and make known to the secretary and all the people at DEQ our stance on what we've heard, and we will do that. And I hope at the same time that DEQ in its impending decision will take seriously everything that it's heard as well. We will make known to you all how we feel about it and what recommendations we offer. And to those of you who took the time to physically come as well as check in virtually with us, we're grateful to you. It is the power of community voices that I think is always important. The stories behind the data are very, very important in all matters, but especially in these kinds of matters. We're eternally grateful to all of you for coming tonight and sharing your views. We heard you. Rest assured that that's the case. I promised I'd get you all out of here before breakfast. I think that our work is done, for at least for this evening. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
If nobody else seconds, I'm second. Thank you all again, and happy Thanksgiving to all of you. Stay safe.